Dude, I really though I want to start by saying like I really appreciate you coming on and it was really nice meeting you at the Atlanta Film Festival. And again, congrats, dude, on She Watches Blindly playing there. That must have been crazy watching a movie on the big screen.
Yeah, it was. Thank you for having me, and thanks for saying that. But yeah, it was the first time I've gotten to see the film on a large screen. Most so far it's just been existing on my own computer, and in the edit room, so to speak, and just the few people that have seen it. I've had sent links to the cast and so forth to watch, but we had never like gotten together to watch the whole thing. So there was definitely a sense of not knowing how it would land and not knowing if people would respond to it at all. It was like my parents were there. I don't tell my parents anything about what my films are going to be about or what they're going to think about it. So yeah, it was a lot in that way, but it felt like the response was very positive, at least from what I could tell. And you never quite know because people are kind of on very nice behavior at a film festival. But the questions people were asking were not technical ones, which is a good sign. They were just asking about the characters and they were kind of putting forward their interpretations of the events. So I was like, okay, I think it's nice to see people engaging. And it was definitely something I noticed that it felt like people were kind of leaned forward in the auditorium and there weren't too many people getting up to go to the bathroom or things. So I was like, okay, I think it's working, so it was very fun.
Yeah, it felt like a great energy and a great response in there. And just to reiterate, the movie is She Watches Blindly.
It's okay. It's okay. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. That's what you just put out. Good boy.
Leave me alone. Stay away from me. Disgusting.
Good boy. I'll clean. I'll take care of it. It's okay. It's okay.
I'm not mad at you.
No, I'm not mad at you.
I am the man from the number.
Do you have any more festivals coming up too with that?
Hopefully, I've got a whole other round of submissions that we're still waiting to hear back from. So yeah, it's definitely the first time making a feature length film. So there's a whole kind of landscape of navigating this distribution kind of landscape, as it were, that I'm just beginning the process of.
And it's a confusing one. So yeah, hopefully we can enlighten some of that on this episode today. But yeah, I mean, just to start off by giving you a compliment, dude. I remember I sat down to watch She Watches Blindly. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about you. I just knew what Matt told me. And that your beginning is so visceral and gave me such a reaction. It was such a good opening and like with the fingernails and stuff. Ooh, man, I loved how you opened that thing. And also I remember watching it like, yeah, dude, this is probably shot on Alexa, freaking crazy lenses. And I remember talking to you after of how and even you mentioning in the Q&A how run and gun and low budget is and how many hats you had on, which is so impressive. I mean, do you want to touch on that? Like maybe about the budget and how many roles you had to take on?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally there was a way of trying to think about filmmaking, which is to be able to do more with less. And I think that's kind of where it comes from. And so, I mean, yeah, the budget was like nothing, it was in, what I could spread across several credit cards, basically, for a season and, start a new line, 0 APR for a year. That's the scale of the budget. There was no outside investing or anything in the film. And but that's kind of the way that I've liked to work in the last decade since graduating from film school, where it was like you kind of trying to pay attention and watch careers of filmmakers you admire and seeing, okay, well, how do you and also seeing other stories and seeing, okay, well, look, money is not going to ever come to you with just no strings attached, and you're not going to be able to just do everything that you want. And then furthermore, it's like, well, why would I really ask someone for a ton of money? Like having a certain humility and being like, okay, you should prove your worth. Like, why should you expect that people will just give you tons of money? Like, what's the precedent for that? What are the comps? You know, can you really show that from a financial perspective? So taking on a bit more humility in that way, I think it made it feel like less of a constraint to have a small budget when you can think about building something from the ground up that is conceivable in the small scale. So this was possible because it was filmed in my own house. I mean, you might recognize the wallpaper in the film, but this is actually Beth's room that I'm in right now. So it's just my house and
wallpaper.
that was the thinking. You know, hopefully it conveys something. Basically having total control over the house is like, well, you know, you could pay for a set, you could pay for total access to a place, but then you have the access for that very small time frame versus if you are filming in a place that you have 100% access to, you can plan ahead, you can work on it for months at a time. And so it was like having that scale, it was feasible to work very precisely, as it were, as opposed to just kind of having to solve problems with money. So I could go in, and it was like I was also the cinematographer. That was one of the hats that I was wearing. But it was something where it was like, well, it wouldn't almost be fair for me to ask someone to be cinematographer if I am going to be in the house all the time because I live here. So it's like I'm going to be there thinking about the shots, like framing them up with my camera, thinking about the lighting, and then someone else will come in and have opinions about that, and they've spent less time in the space, less time thinking about it. So it's like, well, so the only kind of way that I made that easier was I asked my friend Jesse Shemeka. I said, would you camera operate for me? You know, would you? And he kind of is also a gaffer too, but it was like, would you operate the camera, because that's really where it gets hard for director DPs, as it were, to work as if they're physically involved in the process of filmmaking, looking for HDMI cables, looking for lens swapping. It's like, if I can have those things taken off my plate, I think I can think about the image and the performance at the same time. So, I mean, most of the crew was, really 4 friends, and it was a kind of a coincidence, but as it happens, all of us are directors for our main crew. So it was like everyone of that crew is very willing to jump in wherever needed, like without ego, and just has a lot of capability to wear multiple hats. So it's like the crew at the end, there's credits where it's like most of the crew, and there's 5 of us that I list there in that main crew that was there more or less every day. And like every single role, I did unusual credits where it's just like the person and then the list of the things they did, because it was so many roles that we wore. So it just felt like the right way to kind of honor the small crew and the way that everyone did a lot of different roles, really.
Yeah, I thought that was a really unique way to do the credits. And something that was really important, I think you touched on, is that notion of, no one's going to knock on your door and hand you a script and hand you $1 million and tell you, hey, buddy, make this movie. And I've noticed that mistake in film school, and we both went to SCAD, funny enough, which is a pretty good school, met a lot of cool people there. But I saw that mentality there, where I remember asking people when they're going to do their feature, and people just like, I'm waiting till somebody almost gives me approval. And that's, I think, a big lesson and takeaway that you just mentioned there, is you kind of gave yourself the approval to do it. And you did that by kind of taking your resources. And it sounds like in a great network of collaborators to work with. So I think that's very important that you touched on there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a tough lesson to learn, but the fact is that, failing and not being super successful when you're really young is like one of the best things that can happen to you. I mean, I think back of, my first film school, thesis film or whatever you call it. And it's like, well, what if everyone was just like, Bryan, this is the best thing ever. Like, you just have all this money. It's like, what about all the things that I would have learned since then? Yeah. So it's like, it's unfortunate. And I think you do see that sometimes, where people are kind of they're given the super ladder up to the top instantly, and then they're not actually forced to grow, and then they go from that kind of medium level budget to huge budget, and then the huge budget movie kind of, it's lacking all these fundamentals that you didn't notice when they were able to work on something more idiosyncratic. So yeah, it's not the fun lesson that we want to in the modern world, to be told you can't have instant success is not the best thing that could happen to you. But I think it's the case. It's been, this many successive projects of slowly learning and trying to develop the craft and continue to do so, really.
And let's touch on too. I'm curious, like what originally got you into film, and maybe lead into like what kind of inspired your first movie here.
Yeah. So it came out of just hanging out with my friends and like my brother and so forth when I was a kid, and it was funnily enough, it was like a class project that I was just helping my brother my brother's like a couple of years older than me, so I was trying to always hang out with the cooler older kids, and so they were doing a just like a school project, and I had a friend who was like pretty tech savvy, and this is like 2004, and he was like, yeah, hey, I got this torrented copy of Adobe Photoshop and things like that, where he was the guy who knew how to navigate the internet, so to speak. And so he was doing very early Adobe After Effects things and kind of showing us what was possible to do with just a DV camera. And that was like, oh wow, like this is, I never thought that filmmaking could meet me as a person in that way. So that was kind of like the seed, as it were. And then like a year later, I won like a local kind of science fair. And the prize for it was a like $100 Fry's gift card. So I was like, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get a camera. So it was just like I don't know, I don't even know what the brand was, but it was some kind of very early SD memory camera, and it was like it was like no proper aspect ratio. It's like it was obviously every phone is better than the quality of it now, like by already for years at this point, but that didn't matter. It was what we had, and we just kind of started just making silly videos with friends and setting it to music and realizing the potential of it. And then kind of seeing over time that it really filled a hole in something that I always loved doing. It was like, again, getting back to just play as a capital P, growing up. Just my brother and I always using our toys to create really elaborate stories and reconstructing films and things like that was such a big part of growing up. And it wasn't just consuming stories, but actually making them was a huge part of what we did growing up. So looking back, it was like, oh, that's such a natural progression that I would then really become interested in doing that. So yeah, I would say that's a good summary of the earliest days of it.
Yeah, I think for me it was like I was big into Legos. I could spend hours making up stupid stories, and also building sandcastles. There's some fun about building sandcastles and then watching the waves come and like pull them away. So
yeah, Legos were huge for me too, for sure.
So I gotta ask too, what's some of your favorite movies?
I'm a big Tarkovsky fan. I'm a huge Andrei Tarkovsky fan. He's my favorite director. Stalker is my favorite film of his, and then Andrei Rublev, I would say those are the two top of the list for him. And then I like a lot of the film bro-y kind of directors like Stanley Kubrick, Paul Thomas Anderson, the Coen brothers. I mean, those are really a lot of my favorites. What else? Yeah, some classics like The Third Man. So like or like 40s movies. I love 40s noir and things like that. Yeah, I'll leave that there for now. It's probably a good start.
And just to bring it back to She Watches Blindly, yeah, I just remember being really struck with like he had some incredible compositions and shots. Like there's one where your lead's like walking into the kitchen and the camera's like following behind him, and it was just very well constructed, man. So especially now hearing your influences, I can kind of see where you're inspired by, but you really executed it well with that movie.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely something of trying not to copy but to be inspired instead. It's definitely, there's always, especially with Tarkovsky, there's this pull towards that kind of anti-cinema, slow cinema, and then thinking like, okay, but not that. Like I'm not going to try to do that exactly, because I am, you know, I've sort of, there's a process of making peace with the fact that I ultimately want to be a director for a Western audience, as it were, to tell stories in generally conventional manner that I think is able to communicate best to the most people. So it's like, that's at odds with saying Tarkovsky is, you know, your favorite director in some way. So I'm like, how do those things meet, you know, or what am I trying to do? And I hope that I'm never trying to just copy my heroes, as it were, but just kind of see what potential they unleash, as it were, I guess.
And there, you know, there's something to emulating, and it seems like every big director emulates, you know, who they love and who inspires them. That's kind of how you learn too. You learn the process of filmmaking. So, and where you meet with your interest in their like techniques you can pick up, create something unique, you know, where I think of like Brian De Palma liking Hitchcock and then, you know, making his own cool genre movies. So
yeah, it is. It's definitely a tradition, you know, and a tradition as a thing of passing down knowledge generation to generation, you know, hopefully. And then
and it's there forever,
yeah,
like on the movie. So yeah.
Yeah.
And it just blows my mind. You can look at these old movies that are just like, even from the 30s, where you're like, you can't even make this today, dude. It's just,
yeah,
it's mind blowing, especially with no practical effects or no special effects or anything like that. Like, yeah, so there's some, it's so impressive. So
yeah, and just the number of obscure camera tricks that they did in Russia, you know, in like the 30s. It's like, it's so crazy. You watch like Man with the Movie Camera, or like Earth, like there's Dovchenko, and I can't remember the other director, but there's so many of those, just so much. Yeah, when you go back, you see how much of a lineage of imagery there is, and that you're not really alone as a solitary artist. It's inspiring, I would say.
Let's touch on a bit of I'd love to hear something more about the writing process of She Watches Blindly. So did you write the script by yourself?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I definitely collaborate to some degree. Like I have one of the other filmmakers who helped is actually my roommate as well, Justin Suttles, and he also went to SCAD. So we've been working on films for a long time. So as my roommate, he has no choice but to end up hearing, you know, what random ideas I have and bounce things around, and I do the same thing for his screenplays. But yeah, the script, it started in as a short film, really, and I wrote it. It's important to probably say, with all the cast in mind that ended up being in the film. It was definitely, like I said, kind of getting back to that philosophy of working with what you have, not with kind of what you wish you had. So that was really key to it in that way. But yes, it started as a short film, and I sent it to Emily, who plays Beth, and I was just kind of like, what do you think about this? You know, and there was kind of a sense of like, yeah, it's interesting, but there's a lot left on the table from the short. And the short, I would say, if it were to be, it's different than the film, of course, but temporally, it would be like ending the film when Dr. Abbott leaves the house with Earl for the first time, and they kind of walk out of the house. And it was like, what if you ended the film there, you know? And it's like, well, there's so much more to uncover and so much more to do. And it was less complicated in that way. It was clear that there was a lot to unpack. And so it was then, that was 2019 when that happened. And it was another really almost like a year and a half of writing to get to the feature. And all centering on this idea, this question of, well, what if you had this ability to read minds, but it wasn't a gift, it was an illness? What if you were beset by other people's thoughts and emotions without having any control over it? Mm-hmm. That would be, it seemed really novel to me that would be a terrifying thing and not a superpower which you could use. So you'd actually be beholden to all kinds of thoughts and emotions that you control over. And then you add a baby to that mix. It was like, wow, that's such a potent landscape. And it felt like it mapped onto a lot of modern malaises, as it were. So that was really the starting point. And yeah, I would say cracking the screenplay was pretty difficult. There were definitely times where it was like, I'm never gonna figure this out. So it's always like, I wish I could write a screenplay in 3 months or something, but it's always like 18 months for me to write a script, and most of that's not writing; it's just pacing around the house and wondering what to do. But somehow it got done, and we made it. So,
Do you use any like structure books to help you out? Or
I sort of have them in the back of my mind, but I find that they have a limited amount that they can really do ultimately, because I don't think that we think in the linear manner that the screenplay books suggest you write your story, where it's like, oh, I can develop my characters totally separate of the plot and have them existing as these total individuals before I start writing the script and the structure. And then you put them in a situation, you're like, oh, well, I know the character perfectly, so I know how they'll respond. It's like, it's a much more organic and aleatory process where you have kind of flashes of ideas, and you're like, oh, I know I want this to happen, but I don't know anything in between there. And then you realize, oh, well, the plot actually changes what I want the character to be. So it's this thing, they're all developing simultaneously. So it's just not as neat, at least in my head, as the screenwriting books often say. So it's like, when you look back retrospectively at a screenplay, they oftentimes align with what the books say, but that's not how your brain actually functions when you're writing it. And I think that's why people have writer's block. Some of my friends, we kind of say writer's block just is writing. Like, it's just, it's when you realize that most of the writing process isn't actually writing, but just thinking and preparing and asking the right questions and waiting for little kind of flashes of inspiration, that you're like, oh, okay, that's just the process. Like, there's nothing wrong with you, that you can't just sit down and have ideas flow into your head right as you sit down. It takes a long time to integrate those into structures and ideas.
Yeah, it's a good perspective where like the characters can kind of rhyme off the plot, and it can like call them to do specific things. So I haven't really thought about it that way. So I'm happy you brought that up. Yeah. And did you have like a specific writing schedule, or you just kind of write when you're inspired, or just try to get it out when you can?
Well, it was, yeah, I can't say I had always had a tight schedule. But I work as a freelancer in the film business, so that makes it easy. I see the freelancing and my work as almost the side gig, and the writing and whatever I'm working on next as the main thing that's going on. So if I'm not on a job or having some specific plans, then it's basically a writing day or a film day or an editing day for me. So that's kind of how it is most of the time. Just more recently, I've started for new projects to kind of focus on setting aside explicit time for screenwriting. But in the past, I never did, and I'm kind of trying to work to get a bit more diligent in that.
So when did you know the film was ready? When did you know I'm ready to shoot this? Was there a specific moment, or was it just like feedback from people?
Yeah, it was definitely a process. I wanted to shoot it originally more like October, November of 2020. And it was really just things like availability that pushed it back, and also realizing I needed a few more months to prepare. But it was probably like July of 2020 that I sent the script to really the principal cast, and it was more of a scheduling thing. It was a pretty brass taxes thing of like, we're going to do this at some point. Everyone was excited about it, but we were all navigating that kind of early COVID era landscape of figuring out people's availability and what everyone was comfortable with, different levels of expectations and things like that. So that was kind of a lot to balance, and also travel plans that people had. So it was really more of a logistical struggle than anything else. Mm-hmm. I think it's always, I don't know, as far as the script itself and emotionally being there, I think it's almost like every part of me is kind of gearing up to do that all the time. So it's almost like I can't evaluate that process. But it was like I would start working on the technical aspects as well. Like there's some kind of special camera rigs as well that we built for some of the imagery of her headspace, where you really see things kind of from her perspective occasionally in the film, and both the conversations that she has with Dr. Abbott, they have this kind of, there's a different feeling, and sometimes people look at it and they're like, was that part shot on film, or there's a different visual, but it's really just a kind of using a large format lens and this kind of special way to capture it on the ground glass, which I'd have to get into all the specifics of to explain, that was doing that. But it was like at one point I just kind of started buying old lenses and things and just started working on it, and that was maybe August, and it was like, you know, the old meme of like, my body is ready. It's kind of like almost that physical of like, I'm just starting to solve the technical problems and just doing it without thinking like, okay, well, I need to do this before this time. It's like, just, that's where the interest is for me. And that's, I just start solving problems. And then it's like, oh, well, I think the rig is ready. So let's do it, you know?
So you almost, it almost sounds like you were like, you're just going to do it, hell or high water.
Yeah.
Kind of like maybe that energy like bled through the rest of the cast and crew.
I think so. Yeah. I would like to say that I'm, you know, very organized and a producer. I don't like the producing side of being a filmmaker, you know? So it was very much, intuition led, I would say, as far as when I was ready and how I was going about doing things and solving the problems. But that's possible on the scale that I was working. It's kind of like designed so that I wouldn't need to have a lot of complex producing problems to solve. So that's what made it possible.
I'd love to hear too about a little more of your like director prep work and what that was like. Like, did you like rehearse or storyboard?
Yeah. Really, I think the biggest thing for me is conversations with the actors and just having the level of trust there that everyone's on the same page. And I would, I think, like to have done more rehearsals in the film if I could. It was difficult with managing people's schedules and again, the COVID things, where it was like we had casts that were, you know, up for commercial roles or other shows that were in town. And it's like, well, if I get sick, I could lose, you know, this whole role, you know, which is like, you know, the big kind of guest star role sort of thing. So it's like, well, we shouldn't risk rehearsals. And again, early 2020 and early 2021, kind of at the height of those kind of test cases, where those kind of things were what were in mind. So yeah, in a perfect world, I would have loved to have done a significant amount more of rehearsals, because I end up really doing a lot of takes on set, I think, because of not having done the rehearsals. And it's almost just, it's not to blame anyone really, but it's just the number of takes is almost required to just have it really be in the blood, as it were. Because it's like, if you're just going through the lines and it's a pretty complicated scene and it's the first time really being in the space with someone, there's a sense of just, it's not there because it's just a mechanical process of having the lines go back and forth between everyone. So it was, sometimes it's like, no, just do another. And it's like, what are the notes? It's like, no notes, just another, because it just has to be, it has to be down there really. And there were maybe one or two times that got a little frustrating for the cast, but overall, I think everyone had a good attitude about it.
Yeah, I'm sure they
going after the same thing.
Frustration in the moment, but then later when they watch it, they appreciate it.
Yeah, there were a number of times they're like, Bryan, are you sure there's so many takes necessary? And then it's like, well, look what takes in the movie. It's the last take, like the very last one, you know, for 80% of what's in the film. So
I've had to deal with that, and it's just a thing of like, you know, it's about getting it right, not getting it done, you know. So
yeah,
that's definitely the way to do it. And the camera ultimately for that type of stuff doesn't lie, so you can kind of tell if you're bullshitting. And so
yeah, exactly. And it was also, I mean, just that was kind of, once again, that's how we structured the film, where we could work ahead of time so that when we are there, it's like, well, we have a lot of time. Like we're deliberately made this to not have a crazy schedule. So of course, let's do a lot of takes. Like this is the time we set aside to play and learn. So there was another side of doing takes where it was like, that was good, but let's just try something a little different here. So there was room for discovery as well and play in that as well, that I think people enjoyed. So there were both sides of it. Sometimes the frustration, but sometimes just the exploration.
And how many shooting days did you guys do?
There was 21 over 7 weeks. So it was basically about 3 days per week. And then I had about 4 days off to kind of prep the house for the next sequence.
And you shot most of the movie in your own house.
Yeah, about 90% of the film is just there. So
you're just like waking up and all the gear was everywhere. And
yeah.
What was that like, those 7 weeks?
Yeah, well, I don't recommend it from the work-life balance perspective. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. I mean, it's one of those very vital times that you remember. And I think I mentioned this on stage, but it was really exciting because there was a really great camaraderie of the crew by the end. Like, you know, just working with a small team like that and more or less the same people. For some reason on my short films over the years, it's always been kind of a ramshackle crew where it's like, I've got 2 days here, 2 days there, another weekend, a couple weeks later there. And it would always be different crews. So you'd kind of lose this sense of it being a cohesive team and a vision. So at the end, you just feel like you've run out of steam. But it was, because we had really the same people on the crew the whole time, there was this sense of real family that we got making it in such a kind of scale. And yeah, I think I said this on stage, but it was like the last day when we finished filming, like there was a sense of not wanting to leave. And that was like just the coolest thing. It's like, okay, no one hates me, you know, like this is, we're going to continue being friends after making this and you know, go on to do more things, hopefully. So
was all the crew, was all the cast and crew volunteer, or did you?
Yeah, all volunteer. I mean, all of us have worked together on other things before. There's like a good portion of my cast you could just see in other of my short films over the years, and even some of the locations too. So there was also kind of, I guess, a sense of, you know, as far as talking again about filmmakers that inspire you, someone like Bergman, you know, who works with the same cast all the time and works on, you know, those islands that he loved, or that one island where he lived for years. And that sense of a really, that chamber piece quality of his films also has really spoken to me as kind of an interesting model, I would say, to emulate.
Yeah, your house was your Bergman Island.
Yeah, pretty much, you know. So
now that you've like done kind of like a small micro budget feature, do you notice like, is there kind of any advantages to that over a bigger budget project?
Well, the advantages from a distribution perspective is that you don't have to make that much money back for it to be a profitable film for people. So you don't have a lot of things, you don't have a big hole that needs to be recovered out of from an investor or distributor standpoint. So that, I mean, all the advantages are mostly creative advantages in the sense that you have a lot of freedom. No one's breathing down your neck. You get to, if you make a mistake, you know, if you blow it on your micro feature, you're not going to really alienate people that trusted you with thousands or millions of dollars. So that, I think, is a value that can be understated very easily. I mean, it's a huge value. The downside is these are all from, you know, I suppose, marketing perspectives, but it's like, well, you don't have as much of a support structure behind you to get the film out there. You don't have name, talent, or big identifying characteristics to put a target for distribution to say, well, this movie deserves to be seen. So you kind of really have to work from the strength of your filmmaking to get anywhere. So that's an immense burden. But again, I think ultimately it's probably, it'd probably be better if all filmmakers had to grow up through that process and really justify their ability to manage resources and truly be a director. So yeah, I think it's a way to learn, but it's also, I think if I did this when I was younger, I would probably have had way too many unrealistic expectations for what it could do. And there were definitely, some younger filmmakers that I talked to at the festival, they're like, I'm gearing up for my first feature, and I just graduated school. We're all trying to make a feature. And I don't want to tell them just don't do it. I never want to be negative to that degree with someone who's excited. But it's like, be careful though. Like, make sure that you're really ready. Make sure you're going to, make sure you have the right expectations for this. That you're not going to just make this and your career is going to just go sailing off into the great success land that we all want. Yeah. So it's like, that's the danger, but the benefits are all in what you're able to learn through the process of it. And yeah, if you make something really great that connects with more people, then just so much the better.
Also, I don't think a lot of people realize, like I didn't realize getting into it, how much of a commitment it becomes and how much of your life it takes over. And even just how expensive movies are. Yeah. Like sounds funny to think about that, but when you're growing up, you look at a movie, you have no idea, like, they had to house all these people, feed all these people, pay some people, and all this shit adds up. And even finishing costs for a movie get expensive. So there is a lot of sobering realizations to making your first feature. So yeah,
it is just how long you live with it too. I think one of the things you don't realize is how long it takes, and in the independent world, especially. If you're a studio director and you have all those resources behind you and a full edit team and so forth, and then those filmmakers can roll out a film every 2 years or so, or every 3 years, or sometimes faster, depending on the director. But this is kind of the thing that when you're working on your own, it's at least a half a decade commitment. You're spending a long time with it. So you really have to, you'll learn, if you're cut out for it by doing it, for sure.
And that's a big thing, realizing like you gotta love the idea. So if you hate it, you're not gonna last it half a decade.
Yeah. I would say on that note, it was like, if there was one thing I could give to someone else to do, it would be the post sound. Really, that was what I spent the most time on in post production. And I do have some good friends who do post sound, but I didn't want to ask them to make a feature, like I know how much of a time commitment that was. So it felt like I was the only person that I could ask to do that time commitment. But that was where I felt like I lost objectivity editing for so much time. It wasn't doing the cut itself. It was done in June of 2021, and we finished filming in March. So it was 3 months to do a first cut. That's not too long of a time. I was working on the sound though for a whole year, basically, after that point, really, to get it done. So it's like, and the sound is infinitely deep too, so you could just go insane. And then you can't really see the film anymore because you're just hearing the details of it. So yeah, it was in the post-production where I found I could lose perspective of what I was making, and lose some of your enjoyment for the film, which is sad, but then hopefully it comes back at certain times.
I'm surprised you didn't go crazy in that process, man. That's impressive.
Yeah. Well, maybe I did. I don't know, but or at least temporarily. But there's many more reasons as to why to have more people to do it than just their abilities. It's also for your own distance, And I think that in an ideal setting as a director, you can stand back a little bit from it and not be too in it. And that's also the disadvantage of being cinematographer at the same time is getting too stuck in the technical details to lose the greater picture. But something to navigate, with as much awareness of those downsides as possible for at least for this production.
Well, I thought you did a great job with all that stuff. So I was surely blown away. And with the sound, which is impressive to hear that, it sounded great at the theater. So
well, thank you.
That you did all that, and I'm sure you don't. Do you have a sound background, or you just had to figure it out as you go?
It's just from all the other films that I've done. We did get some classes at SCAD, of course, in the basics. I sort of feel like the mix is good enough, to work. But I'm like I hope there's no sound engineers in the audience, like they're gonna see through my tricks.
Yeah, I mean, you're always gonna be your biggest critic, so I'm sure there's always stuff you can change in there. But yeah, you touched on a bit of the funding. Did you self-fund the whole movie? Did you get private investors or
Yeah,
crowdfunding like
yeah,
that?
it's just self-funded, you know. Yeah, there's not much story to it. It was just I didn't want to ask people really to not knowing what this film could be or how far it could go. It felt like, in a way, kind of irresponsible to ask for money from people. So it felt like just the right way to do it.
So how did you kind of support yourself financially during this whole process? Because it does take
Yeah,
a while, and I think this is something interesting for people getting into it, like realizing, yeah, how do you stay afloat during this whole
yeah,
process of taking a whole movie on?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that is the whole challenge of doing anything artistic. Is it's like the world is constantly fighting you and wanting you to do something more productive. You know, so that you can survive, and it's like everyone kind of has to learn how to navigate that. Like I mentioned, I work in film because in the freelance, I do many different roles, probably too many. But I work sometimes as a cinematographer, and then primarily as on commercial things as like a gaffer or as a best boy or as a key grip. You know, I'm not in the union. I felt like the commercial space kind of afforded me more time than being on full length films and shows that shoot in town where you're got 12-hour days for 5 months at a time. So that would be really not conducive to writing. But with making a film, I could just kind of know, you know, for 3 months that I would be taking very little work, and I could let my contacts know, like, okay, you know, for this length of time, I won't be as available. But it was like, you know, just working a lot. It was so weird for, I mean, everyone who works in the film commercial world will tell you how busy the latter half of 2020 got, and then it was just insanely busy through the probably until about November of last year. It was, for everyone I know, like the busiest time for their working. It was like, I guess, you know, that kind of inflation stimulus kind of stuff was a lot of money for ad companies and businesses to spend on that sort of thing. So we were just doing so much gig work that there was a good nest egg saved up, and then plenty of work when I came back that I would just go, you know, after I finishing the film or finishing shooting rather, you know, going and doing gigs and you know, just changing the hats like that, I guess, as it were, and then just kind of finding it funny to be in a different role again when you've been doing this whole thing and people don't know what you've been working on.
It's great. Yeah, you're in this whole world, and then you come back out to like
Yeah,
the real world or whatever. And yeah, it's interesting because I remember after shooting my movie, which we shot like 80% of it at the end of 2020, or sorry, at the end of 2019, and the rest of it at the end of 2021. There was a in between where I was like PAing on sets for a while, and it's just like, what'd you do? It's like, oh, I shot a movie, and they're like, oh, sure you did, dude. Or
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like,
Yeah,
no one cares. Yeah,
yeah. At a certain time, you just stop mentioning it unless it's like a close friend, because it's just people don't quite know what that means or what you have going on, and you get tired of explaining it too, because you're like, if people do take interest and they're like, hey, how's your thing going? You're like, well, I'm just still editing, editing, you know, hoping to get into a festival. I don't know what to say, you know. So yeah, and it's like for me too, I was like very quiet about it, you know, on social media and whatever. And it's like, well, look, you know, I'll say something when there's a time you can see it, but before then, it's just hype for nothing, you know, if I just kind of post stuff. So
and everyone's like, where can I see it? Where can I see it? So,
yeah.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about your film festival strategy. Did you have like a specific festivals you're going for? Did you just submit to a bunch of them, or did you even like did you cover letters? Did you reach out to the board and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be frank, I haven't had that much success with film festivals like my whole career, you know. So I've probably done something wrong in that regard over the years. Atlanta was the last festival I had submitted to for the first year, and I did it in a tiered way. I think learning from making plenty of films and getting into a handful of festivals over the years, it was something that I tell people, like, just submit to festivals that you would actually go to if you get in somewhere, because otherwise, you know, you're like, what's it for? Like, is it for some little laurels or something? And unfortunately, it kind of can be that way. But if it's like that being a good filter, like would you, go get an Airbnb in a different city and go to that festival? That's kind of really the main metric I use to submit. And in the first year, I tried to submit to, the highest tier festivals, but also, within the realm of, okay, which ones would likely accept the film? Like, what are the kind of right mixture of things? And then getting into Atlanta Film Festival, which was the first acceptance that I got, it was like, okay, that's cool. So let me do another round of submissions, because now that's the the world premiere. So that then I opened it up to a whole other round, which is still ongoing, of more regional film festivals and more different scale, so that hopefully in that arena I will have a bit more success with it, a bit more chance to show it to people.
Did you highlight like your local Atlanta filmmaker and that was shot in Atlanta?
Yeah, for Atlanta Film Festival, I have been there before. And so I was able to, my discount and that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know if that the whole programming staff has changed since I was there last, so I don't know if it, did me any particular favors or not. But you don't really know such things, so
yeah. That's the thing I found with festivals. It's like, so you can't really find any info online. Like it's confusing, and you hear like conflicting views. Like some people say submit early, submit late. Yeah,
I can't say I know about it. Like that I have a good grasp on it. I've had really as much fun just on YouTube, literally, because I find people are so honest with their feedback. Whereas people in festivals are almost too supportive, as so I've like just my film, The Emissary, which is on my channel, was a sci-fi short film that I made in 2017, and that somehow it hit the right algorithm type things, and it has like 600,000 views, which is just ridiculous. But that was so, better than the views is just the random comments people have. And it's like, you realize how much people, do not extend the graces to you that a really film friendly festival audience does. So I've just really enjoyed seeing the crazy things and the little details that people fixate on. It doesn't bother me. It actually is kind of fun. And there was a couple of days where I would meet up with some of the cast of that film, and we would just go through and just laugh about the reviews and again see the things people say. So I've enjoyed that because of how honest the feedback is. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say what festivals do. I mean, there's definitely still a sense, especially with the feature, of it having this gatekeeper role that's important. We had some kind of sales rep type people reach out to us just by being in the festival. And those are people that can connect you with distributors and help you get your film out there. So they're very key people in that whole process. And they still use festivals as kind of mediating structures to help them sort out what films they will pay attention to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely still part of the landscape. I can't say I fully understand the process of it.
Do you have any distribution lined up or any strategy for that?
Well, we're working on it a little bit. Like I said, with some, I probably can't say too much about it, unfortunately. And maybe, if I do get it where you see it on Amazon, we could follow up, and I could tell you more about it when I'm on the other side of it. I'll definitely have some things to say. But since it is a work in process, what I will say is that, I mean, we are in some talks, which is very exciting. And I would just tell people to do their paperwork on the front end, and that's going to help them a lot too.
Do your paper, get your movie out there.
Yeah.
So I'd love to kind of end it on lessons you learned, and if you could go back and talk to Bryan before he shot his first feature, what type of advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly like I think, as you said, you're your own worst critic. So I would say, it's like, if there's anything I would still do, it's probably just more drafts of the screenplay, really. Like it's like most of the problems are still going to get better. Like that's the place to really improve your script. and I'm very proud of what we did. But when I look at everything, and it's like some of those screenwriting problems you end up solving in the edit as well, and you restructure some things, and you go, okay, this is the final process of writing the script again, basically. So again, it's not that I'm unhappy with the end result or things like that, but you do realize how many problems you can solve and problems you can avoid ever having come up in the screenwriting process. And I did probably 6 drafts or so, or at least, but do 10 drafts. Like just keep hammering it down, and you're never going to regret doing that. I think that's the biggest takeaway. A lot of the other lessons are things where it's like, well, I've done that, and I think that was fine for the time, but I don't want to do it again. As far as the doing everything myself, doing filming in my own house, that sort of stuff. It was like, well, that was good, but it's now time to take a different step forward, because you can kind of do that. And for someone like me, fairly introverted person, it's like you can avoid the interpersonal aspect of filmmaking and the networking, putting yourself out there aspect of it, and the team building, the large logistical management aspect of it, you can avoid for a while by working in such a small way. But then you realize it's like, well, look, if you keep working, you need to learn this other side of filmmaking. You need to learn the delegation and the managing things. And you can only rely on yourself and your own abilities as a crutch for so long, and then you're going to have to start working in a different manner. So that's the thing going forward, is kind of mastering that other domain, as it were.
Keep hammering away, man. But dude, congrats to you, man. This is a major achievement to make any movie. Not only make a movie and write it, but finish it. So kudos to you, dude. That's inspiration to all indie filmmakers, man. And I really appreciate you coming on, sharing the knowledge. Is there anywhere, any social media or anything you want to highlight for people to follow you?
Yeah, I would say I love just sharing what I've learned over time and sharing my thoughts. So I have my YouTube channel with all of my short films. I don't have the feature uploaded on the YouTube, of course, yet. But many of my previous works are there. And then I have a whole kind of series where I talk about why modern movies are the way they are. And then I also have a Substack, which deals with themes that's called Lucid Themes. And I sent Alec the links there in our chat here, so hopefully he'll share those. But that is really, trying to connect our moment in filmmaking, as it were, to larger social trends, and trying to draw the connecting threads as to why movies are the way they are and what the future maybe has in store for us. So it's definitely pretty heady stuff, but hopefully there's people who are interested in that sort of thing.
Sounds awesome. Sounds like another podcast episode too in the future.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Well, thanks again, Bryan.